Hey, good afternoon, everyone. My name's David Mills. I'm Director of the Centre for Global Higher Education, and you are at another CGHE webinar. It's a great pleasure to be welcoming Łukasz Misiewicz from the University of Gdansk this afternoon, and those of you who study or are interested in the ways in which we are governed by metrics will know that this topic, thinking about different logics of evaluation, is really important in a world where data provides a shortcut. How do we hang on to other logics of evaluating scholarship? And so Łukasz is going to be talking about his most recent book, Academic Judgments Between Logics of Truth and Game, that came out with Brill very recently this year, and perhaps drawing on his older book work as well, Examinations in Sociological Perspective. And what I like, Łukasz, about what you're proposing today is, you're really trying to think quite theoretically about different ways of understanding the games scholars play and also thinking about the sociology of assessment. So Michèle Lamont and Randall Collins, and of course Pierre Bourdieu's great work on thinking about Homo academicus. So as always, we'll give you half an hour to present your ideas, and ideally we finish soon after halfway through, and then there's lots of chance for everyone in the room to ask questions. Do use the chat function to post your comments and thoughts. With that, no further ado, Łukasz, the screen's yours.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for having me today. Thank you for joining me today. The title of my talk is Merit, Community, and Metrics, Balancing Three Logics of Judgment in Polish Academia. This presentation is just based on my recently released book, which investigates how judgments are formed in academic context, particularly during reviews and habilitation proceedings in Poland. Now, my goal today is to introduce and explain the theory of logics of judgment and explore its social and epistemic dimensions. I would like to show you how this theory works empirically and why it could be useful for further studies. But I would like not to focus on methodological details in this presentation, but rather on theory functioning. We know that in academia, judgment is everywhere. We assess publication, grant proposals, teaching effectiveness, candidates for tenure, promotion, and grants application, and so on. And we do so through more just technical or epistemic reasoning. So evaluation is a social practice, and I would like to explore the frameworks we use to make those judgments. So I'll argue that academic evaluation is structured by multiple competing logics, each with distinct sources, symbols, and implications as well. So what exactly do I mean by a logic of judgment? Of course, I do not define the logic as a formal system of deduction. Rather, it is a symbolic framework, a structured way of making sense of what is valuable, legitimate, and true, and it guides how individuals perceive, interpret, evaluate academic work. This concept is influenced by James March and Olson, a distinction between the logic of consequences and the logic of appropriateness, as well as Boltanski and Thevenot idea of so-called seat orders of work. But unlike those, the logics as described emphasize individual symbolic repertoires. So this is quite subjective, embodied frameworks through which people see and judge academic work. To clarify, the logics of judgment I propose are micro-sociological. They do not primarily explain collective behavior, but individual acts of judgment shaped by internalized symbolic resources. So like March, I view decision as deeply entangled with social identity and context, and like Boltanski and Thevenot, I explore how justification draw on cultural repertoires, that I focus more specifically on academic evaluation and the epistemic symbolic dimension that is involved within this logics. So in the first look, let's introduce the three main types of this judgment logics. So first, we have the logic of true, that is based on epistemic criteria, merit criteria, that is relating to true knowledge, scientificity. The second knowledge is a knowledge of a so-called scholarly game. So this is a game rooted in internal norms of academic community. And this newest logic that we have in academia is the logic of evaluation game. It is logic rooted in external institutionalized systems of evaluation like metrics, rankings, and policy-driven criteria. This is the logic that is greatly described by Emmanuel Kulczycki in his book, The Evaluation Game. Then each of these logics can frame the same object. So the publication, application for tenure, grant, promotion, and so on, the person of researcher as well. All of these subjects could be assessed by all of these logics. So let me consider the specificity of this concept. So I would like to show you the features of this logic as I imagined it. So first is individualism. Logics of judgment apply at the level of individual evaluator. They guide the way people form a judgment based on their own symbolic resources, perceptions. We are not talking about mechanical rules or collective systems alone, but how individuals draw on these logics when making decisions. So this is the consequence of the micro-stratificational approach presented in the book that is taken over from Randall Collins, just my favorite sociology. And the second, the logics of judgment are composed of complex symbols related to science. Each logic operates with repertoires of symbols such as true, impact, originality, efficiency, and so on. These are concepts that evaluators mobilize when interpreting candidates' works and scholarly texts. The third feature is symbolic atomism. This may sound quite technically, but it simply means that symbols can be disassembled and recombined in various argumentative chains. So the same symbol, say innovation, may appear in the logic of true, logic of game S, and logic of game E, but in different meanings, of course. So one reviewer may see innovation as a deep theoretical breakthrough, another as strategic novelty that attracts attention, another as policy-driven formal requirement. So this symbol itself is flexible. Fourth features is sequentiality. And the logics rarely operate in isolation. In practice, they appear in sequences of justification. Reviewer might begin by evaluating the truthfulness of the article, shift to considering whether it aligns with field expectation, and then end with comment on publication metrics, for example. So the sequences are not random. They reflect the internalized structures of evaluative truth. And finally, contextuality. Here, it means that logics are not free-floating. They are deeply shaped by social context, by institutional setting, disciplinary cultures, even network structures. So certain social configuration encourage specific logics and specific sequences. For example, an evaluation committee dominated by policy-oriented researcher may favor game E, and while in theoretical subfield may lean toward the true logic. So now let we look deeper at each of this logic. So first, the logic of true that is typically associated with peer review at its best. So it asks, is the claim true? Is the method sound? Does the work contribute valid knowledge? So this logic is built on methodological rigor, theoretical insight, epistemological ideals, and so on. The true logic assumes that science is truth-seeking activity and that evaluation should follow the same path. So now within this logic, we found recurring symbols such as truthfulness. It is the most obvious because it is a result of the name of this logic. But then we have objectivity. I think this very important idea here, idea that claims stand independently of their authors. So this is really important in relation to the second logic, because here in logic of truth we assess claims without anger and passion, without favoring some groups or statements and so on. We are focused only on merits. And obviously, we have many different symbols in this logic. So ultimacy, understanding, utility, but all of them are not just abstract ideals, but this is the part of how reviewers see and assess this work. So now we can go deeper into the logic of a game of scholarly community that reflects the social world of academia. It is based on recognition, regulation, and strategic navigation of communal norms. This is why I employ the metaphor of game here, because using this logic requires jumping into the next level of observation, seeing this community like, from the bird's eye perspective. So judgment here is not about true in the abstract, but about what is seen as legitimated, as valuable by our peers, for example. So this logic is social, reflexive on communal norms, and often implicit. Reviewers employed symbols derived from their community observation that involve reflection achieved through networking, understanding formal hierarchies, knowing what kind of work counts in a particular field. And this logic is particularly seen in Pierre Bourdieu, a Homo academicus that described science as a field of symbolic struggle, a game of for authority, distinction, and this game S is about playing that game skillfully with, as Bourdieu said, practical sense. So, in contrast, we have also the logic of game E, which is more metric based. It is imposed by evaluative systems, so national policies, university rankings, grant audits, and so on. This logic is bureaucratic, standardized, and metric driven. So it cares less about knowledge per se, but more about performance indicators that are treated as proxies for other qualities. So these institutions in which we work now increasingly rely these measures to allocate resources, for example. And to better understand this logics in comparison, I would like to walk you through a comparative overview based on 5 key dimensions. Uh, Consider first the origin of rules. So in logic of truth, develops rules internally within the scientific community through debate, critique, theoretical refinement. Similarly, the logic of game S also evolves within the community, but through more informal means. So tacit norms, peer expectations, symbolic recognition. And by contrast, logic of game E is imposed from outside the scholarly field. So here we have these policymakers, policy decisions, bureaucratic frameworks that just force us to use some kind of this evaluative reasoning. Second, we can compare the pace of change. But the true and game S logics tend to evolve slowly. They are the result of long-term scholarly conversation, gradual shift in cultural norms, and in contrast, the game E logic can change very quickly, often reaching the shift in founding models, political priorities, and this change in national law, for instance, could alter our evaluation criteria just suddenly. Third, the focus of evaluation varies significantly. The logic of true emphasizes epistemic validity. So, is the claim true, novel, methodologically sound? The logic of game S focuses more on community alignment. Does the work conform to what peers recognize as good, ethical, or prestigious. And the logic of game E targets performance indicators, so citation, impact factor, grant success rates, and many different indicators that we know. We should consider transparency. So the logic of true is relatively transparent. Its methods and reasonings we can see in handbooks, methodological guidelines, and so on. The logic of game S is less transparent because its rules are informal, relational, very implicit, and we have to be very close to some core of our community to understand this logic greatly. So on the other hand, game E is highly transparent. Metrics rules are typically documented in official regulations and databases, so we know what criteria are presented now. But this judgment is also we can see some tensions in this among these logics. So we can see that reviewers bringing their symbolic repertoires, biographical experiences, even emotional energy. This notion is borrowed from Randall Collins as well. Just bring different types of logic in the one review. So these logics could be in conflict. A science is devoted to may be misunderstood or marginalized within game S because this community norms may resist disruptive but true work. So it is too innovative for us, for example. Game E critics game S for being subjective and even corrupted. Standardized metrics, say proponents, provide fairness, transparency, especially by definition, and this is assumption of this logic. Especially for young scholars lacking strong local networks. And in contexts like Poland, what is, I think, very important, post-socialist science reforms, this logic gained power as a way to depoliticize and depersonalize evaluation, what could be beneficial for some group that are under the community pressure, for example. They could see their metrics as a highly valued thing. But the game E is also under attack. So critics argue that metrics don't capture quality. They are easily gamed. They homogenize research, they obscure human judgment, and so on. We know this DORA or Leiden Manifesto Declaration that called for recentering subjective and qualitative reviews. And assuming this part, judgment in science are not neutral. Reviewers operate with logics through game S and game E that frame what is valuable. And these logics could be coexisting, competing, and conflicting. And so how can this logics of judgment could be used? How they could work empirically. Logics of judgment encourage us to ask some questions regarding contemporary changes in academia. I think we can show how academic system balance traditional disciplinary norms with emerging metric driven evaluation criteria. We can measure the extent to which the increase in reliance on bibliometric indicators shape peer review cultures. And we can analyze how individual scholars navigate conflicting evaluation logics in promotion decisions. So I would like to show you a piece of research that are conducted on reviews that are gathered between the years 2013 and 2019. And I analyzed a substantial data set of academic reviews. This include This include 474 individual reviews across 195 habilitation proceedings in sociology, and this is the data set for my recently released book. And the articles that are have written as well are based on 174 negative reviews from proceedings of history of arts, sociology, mathematics, and material engineering, what allow us to compare some trends. And this reviews offer, I think, rich material to examine how the different logics of judgment are articulated in a real academic context. So let me consider, maybe a few words for those of you that may be not familiar with Polish academic context, some overview about habilitation, because it's not the degree that is presented and existed in all of countries. So the habilitation is a postdoctoral academic degree and the critical step for career advancement in Poland, especially. Until 2018, the process was overseen by Central Commission for Degrees and Titles, and since then by the Scientific Excellence Council. Until the 2011 higher education law, habilitation candidates had to demonstrate both a significant contribution to the development of their discipline and evidence of substantial academic activity. Additionally, it could be noted that ministerial guidelines also listed formal indicators that reviewers should consider, including bibliometrics, internationalization, quality of publication, and so on. So we can first say on some qualitative patterns of this research and of these reviews, of these patterns that we see in these reviews. So let's begin with the logic of truth, which was the most dominant logic used in negative reviews. This logic was activated in critics of factual errors, especially methodological weaknesses, conceptual vagueness, where key terms, for example, were undefined or overly broad. And what stood out is reviewers often adopted a realist position. So in this logic, they judge whether the work was simply right or wrong. And reviewers valued theoretical depth and conceptual consistency. They sought internal coherence within the candidate's chosen methodological or theoretical framework. Then we have the logic of game as, where we can see that the most important question that we see by the logic of game as is about how well candidates navigated symbolic order of their discipline. So did they see both Polish and international literature in balanced way? Were their publication place in journals recognized by their community? Did they adhere to ethical norms such as avoiding self-plagiarism, for example? But these norms were not uniform. So reviewers often disagreed on what counted as legitimate or appropriate, which reflects the plurality of symbolic standards even within the single discipline. So I think that the very interesting thing is the most debated issue was self-plagiarism. We had an important question of what exactly qualifies as self-plagiarism. It is copying one's words, previous texts, repeating findings, paraphrasing earlier work without hesitation. Some reviewers made decision to exclude, for example, specific publication or fragments of them from the evaluation. This led to asymmetrical judgment. So different reviewers assessing different set of materials within the same proceeding. So it shows how ambiguous the symbolic norms are and how this could lead to incommensurability of the reviews in one proceedings. So they just assess different output. Then we have the logic of game E. So this is also important. Obviously, reviewers were focused on citation counts, journal rankings, foreign collaboration, and so on. But it may be quite surprising that this logic was often somewhat marginal. Only a small number of reviewers used bibliometric indicators to make substantive claims about quality. For many, metrics were a formal requirement, not a central evaluative lens. And what is also here important is that in this logic of game E, there were clear differences in how reviewers trusted and used bibliometric data. So some reviewers fully accepted the candidates' metrics, while others verified them using databases like Web of Science, Scopus, Google Scholar. And in many cases, the application of metrics was selective. So reviewers only counted publication from so-called recognized journals. Others dismissed all non-indexed work entirely, and there was a great threshold for acceptability for indicators values. So what counted as a strong output for one reviewer may be insufficient for another. This reveals that this what we can see as something objective, because this was a promise of introducing this logic of game E, that the assessment will be more objective. Here we can see that despite this fact, this device is still fragile, negotiable. It could be just leading us to some kind of uncertainty. So it could be danger for using this in such an objective manner. We have also tensions among these logics within the reviews. So we observe three types of tension. So intra-review tension. In different reviews, we have to weight different criteria. So what is the most important? What is less important? A reviewer may downplay weak metrics by appealing to the candidate's potential or commitment. So, for example, switching from game E to a game S justification. We can see establishing different types of reasoning as contradictory or confirmatory. Inter-reviewer tension is another thing. One reviewer rejected here the claim as false. This is the interesting problem when the cognitive distance between reviewer and candidates is large. So, for example, imagine how functionalist is assessed by advocate of critical theory or vice versa. So. Here we can see that this claim of functionalist theory is just false for you. But using game S, you can accept even those claims that you don't agree with as widespread and legitimated. So it's solutions, and this is how the reviewers could navigate. We have also intra-logic conflict. Even reviewers applying the same logic, like true, often disagree on what counts as proper methodology, theoretical contribution. So it shows that logics are not fixed rules, but heuristics open to interpretation and internal contestation. And quickly about the quantitative aspect of this, how logics could work as a theory for understanding the judgment in academia. So when we break it down by discipline, we see that different logics were emphasized differently across different disciplines. So I study conclusions of these reviews. So conclusions are the last paragraphs most often, and they almost always involve the main arguments for the ultimate review result. So based on negative reviews from 4 disciplines, we can find interesting patterns. So like you can see, in sociology, the most common form of judgment was based on academic merit, so conceptual, methodological soundness. In mathematics and material engineering, reviewers emphasize community norms, what the field expects and values. In history of art, both kinds of reasoning, so true and community-based, play an equally important role, and it may be not so surprised that bibliometric indicators were most frequently used in material engineering, where nearly half of reviewers referred to metrics. In contrast, in history of art, only 2 reviews even mention such criteria. And the second interesting thing, maybe even more interesting, is that um, this table, because here you can see the situation within this data set involving only those reviews that contain one type of reasoning and conclusion. So we can find which of them are decisive. And crucially, in no disciplines were formal indicators decisive on their own. So even in the more metric focused fields like material engineering, indicators were accompanied by other types of reasoning. This underscores that the logical judgment is multidimensional. So metrics may appear in evaluation, but they do not override this interpretative, symbolic, and true-related, merit-related academic judgment. So what we can say about this theory in this empirical context. So this theory of logical judgment framework proves to be a powerful tool for both qualitative and quantitative analysis of scholarly evaluation. Um, it has a deductive structure, so it enables us to compare this evaluation processes across disciplines, institutional contexts, seeing some patterns over time, seeing these patterns between or among different reviews in some proceedings. So we can find some identity, so we can find some patterns of judgment. We can detect this inter-reviewer variability, and we can even map disciplinary cultures of evaluation. In on some level of commensurability. So ultimately, this approach allows us to move beyond this simplistic opposition between this what is objective and subjective. We could work toward a richer, more nuanced understanding of how scholarly value is constructed and contested in a real-world setting. Okay, so thank you so much for your attention. I welcome all your questions, thoughts, and so on. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you very much, Lukasz. That was fascinating, really detailed, and I like really much your use of sociological theory to think through these different evaluation games and logics. So if you want to unshare, then we can invite comments. Please just use the chat function to write some comments or thoughts or questions. But I'm going to start with just the clarification, perhaps. In these habilitation applications, are the candidates able to decide what logic to use in their own application? So, as in, can they choose whether or not to cite their citation data or to make a case that uses the truth game? You know, I mean, because obviously you're reviewing what the reviewers made of these applications, but how much flexibility is there in the application itself to adopt certain logics?
Yes, I think that if you consider this requirement and this criteria for evaluation, so you can see the significant contribution to the development of specific discipline or we assess candidates whether it demonstrates significant activity, and these are some cultural scripts, and this could be, it is in sociology such a term, empty signifier. So we have to fulfill or just define these terms. What is significant contribution? What is significant activity? And here we can use these different logics of judgment, because we just could decide on our own what we understand as significant contribution. So for one person, it could be just some kind of theoretical depth. For some people, it would be just a solid contribution that just maybe repeat something that is legitimated in the community. Some people will be focused more on evaluation indicators. So in habilitation proceedings, this freedom for reviewers that could use different types of logic is quite large. But yeah.
No, I understand that. I guess my question more was that if I was applying as the candidate, do I make a case according to a certain logic? So if I am a sociologist applying for habilitation, I obviously submit that my degrees, but can I attach a covering case which says, look at my metrics?
Yeah, it's probably this kind of uncertainty, because in this book I studied so-called the borderline proceedings, the proceedings in which we had three very different reviews, and each of a reviewer could focus on different things. So if you apply for habilitation, you probably never know who will be a reviewer. So it's probably very problematic for this candidate, and we can expect maybe seeing some normal indicator values, for example, to what extent there were accepted or denied in different reviews, but actually we don't know whether the next review, our review, will be the same. So yeah.
Okay. No, well, we can come back to it. I think Christian might have answered my question. Let's ask Rachel first, and then Christian. Rachel, please.
Okay. So how do you? Yeah. Okay.
Hi. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah, I had two questions. First of all, how do you explain the disciplinary differences that you were talking about? Because they're really interesting. And secondly, as I'm sure you know, because I think you referenced it, this kind of thing has been conducted in other countries. I think you have Michèle Lamont's book, How Professors Think, and do you see any kind of nation-specific differences in the kind of cultures that you're talking about?
Yeah, I think that the easiest way to explain the disciplinary differences is just emerging evaluative culture, because here like you could see STEM disciplines such as mathematics and material engineering are absolutely more focused on the metrics, and these disciplines that are expected to be more qualitatively focused are actually we can see this reflection in the review patterns. So it is a very interesting question how this evaluative culture evolved. I think that we need some longitudinal research. I didn't study these patterns in this form. Maybe if we could see that, for example, this logic of game E will be more and more important now during this process of different institutional just institutional pressure. It could be some kind of explanation, but I think that this logic of judgment provides us some commensurable, just analytic frame. That if we consider the explanation just in sociological term, probably we should find some other theories that could be more beneficial here. The logic of judgment only show how it could be framed. But the second question, what kind of analysis has been conducted in other countries? I think that this just the deductive nature of the story, that we have this prescribed three logics of judgment and some kinds of commensurability within and among them, allow us to better compare different application, different evaluative situations, cross-nationally too, because here we are focused more on this deductively induced categories more than just induced ones. We have the evaluative culture theory by Michèle Lamont, and this is just a inductive theory. She just creates her categories from the material. It could be quite harder compare differences between different countries, because these categories may be unstable, so they would be not the same across the countries. So this theory could be more beneficial in just this comparison. So yeah.
I don't know if that answers your questions, Rachel. It does. I'm really struck by the sociologists reverting to the logic of truth, which is ironic, given sociologists on the whole would tend to be wanting to question that logic. But perhaps that's what's interesting here, is that even your term around methodology as a sort of logic of truth, and one person's robust methodology could be someone else's flawed methodology, even within the same field. So there is a risk even there, isn't there, of a logic of truth also being part of Game S, and separating those two clearly out. But let me go on to Christian, because you've written a very detailed question which sort of builds on that. Christian, do you want to come in?
Hello. Nice to meet you, Łukasz. Finally, I was reading your publication for some time, and thank you for inspiring material. So my questions gravitate around the porosity between the types of judgments, I would say, like using some kind of a historical and contextual components, like to simply put them into context. So what do you think about these two lines of thinking, whether a non-existence of national evaluation frame within a system makes the difference between the Game S and Game E a bit problematic? This is one line of question. And the other thing is that, like, when we look historically in the practices within the disciplines, especially in chemistry, I would say, or any other like STEM disciplines, how they perceive the emergence of bibliometrics and how they use them in simply to identify what is the rigid science, like historically, starting from like Garfield experiments and so on, and how these practices were naturalized within some kind of a scholarly judgments on the things. What do you think it tells us about the rigidity between the categories? Now, like, I'm really curious. What do you think?
Yeah, thank you so much for these questions. Yeah, I think that logic of Game E could be distinguished from logic of Game S, especially in this context that logic of Game E is something like institutionally imposed categories. So this institutions could be treated as this embodied, these bodies that force us as scientists to just use some categories that are now treated as important. But absolutely, I think that this evaluating these quantitative categories could be naturalized by scholars. So I think that after some time, if we consider citation counts, for example, it could be for some discipline, for example, for material engineering, some kind of subject that involves to the logic of game S, because we just see citation counts as something that we value. All of our community say that it is something that we should be focused on. But this what is this distinction, what made distinction between this logic is whether this is imposed now by the institution. So, for example, to the logic of game E, currently in Poland, it could be also put, for example, language of publication. We are forced to publish in English, for example. This is evaluative pressure. So this is highly valued in Poland. So this is then it could be after some time the aspect of the logic of game as, but now it is institutionally imposed categories. So this is yeah.
If you're coming, Christian.
Yeah, short rejoinder. The core of the question deals with the fact that factually, historically, the things that are imposed within the evaluation were before the practices of evaluative practices of specific disciplinary communities. It's like not bibliometrics came from above the state. They were used. Like also on the threshold between the different identities, like in the case of Garfield Institute, of course, but they were like imposed on the or accepted at the state level, like for example in Poland, because before they were practiced by the communities of knowledge. So of course there is this level of like the another stage that you discussed, which is also equally interesting, how this practice is spread to the communities like through this establishment of the evaluative level. But sorry for thank you very much for the answer. It was really revealing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your question, and I could add that absolutely I think that this first wave of scientometrics, where this what was absolutely focused on research and study metrics and communities by metrics. That's until the institutional, it was a kind of institutional requirement. Then we could see that scientists had to be more reflexive on this and reactive on this. So yeah, okay, thank you.
But I think that's really interesting. I mean, when to build on what Christian was saying is that you probably can't directly compare disciplines, but you could watch the evolution of disciplines over time. I think it's very interesting in this slide that the history of art is still resisting the metrics measurements in terms of game E. That's not used as a criteria for evaluating in that field. Whereas as you say, you'd expect it perhaps in engineering where they're very used to it, but then interestingly less so in maths. But that might also reflect the different types of maths that are going on. So in some ways, what Christian's saying is that actually to understand these balances of games, you have to think about the particular histories of the disciplines. But that's really interesting. So let's go on. Anding, you have another question about this relationship between the three. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, thank you. My questions are also based on Rachel and Christian's questions. I'm wondering the relationship between the three research evaluation logic and their application in other countries. The first question is, except for the tension between the three logics you mentioned in your presentation, are there any other relationship between them? For example, they coexist in some circumstance, or the logic of the game E impact the logic of game S. And the second question is, are the logic of truth and logic of E more objective? These are just my assumption, and more objective and similar in different national contexts, while the logic of S is more local, because I assume that the academic community, their norms might differ in different countries' contexts. So, thank you.
Great,
Thank you so much.
Andy. Yeah.
Thank you. The tension between the logic of game E that could impact the logic of game S, different logics coexist. Yes, I think that this logic of game E could impact both the logic of game E S and logic of game of true, the logic of true. But especially if we consider if we agree that academia is more metricized, this logic of game E could impact the logic of game S, for example, as being just as a proxy of prestige. We could deny this category of our community. We could not consider what community says, but we just see on metrics, and we infer this what previously we had to consider by more qualitative reasoning, and the same with the logic of true. So very, I think rarely, still rarely, but there are some exceptions that just identify metric values, for example, and quality of the work So if we can see that this work is published in a very great journal, we can just infer from this that it is the work of good quality. So this could be not only contradictory, but also confirming logics that could just see some connection between them. And your second question, are the logic of true and logic of game more objective and similar in context, in different national contexts, while the logic of game S is more local? I think it depends on who is a reviewer, because the reviewer that is focused more internationally will be focus on the norms and criteria that are familiar to international colleagues, international peers. And some of them may be more local. So this logic of game S is dependent on this what is focus of this reviewer, which community is this this what created patterns of assessment. So I think that logic of true and logic of game E has this promise of being objective, and actually I think that in some context it could be treated as more objective. But as you can see in different reviews, even the same output, even the same metrics could be assessed differently. And the same with logic of true. If we have two different two different persons, we have the reviewer who have the great cognitive distance with the candidate. Here, this logic of true could be not so objective because we have different paradigmatic attitudes. So maybe if we have quite less or this cognitive distance is smaller, we can find that the logic of true will be something that could make this review more objective, because we have the same criteria, and if we work in some paradigm, for example, we could expect what will be what the assessment will be. So because we have some rigid methodological criteria for assessment, for example.
Okay, thank you, Andy. I hope that answers your question, Lukasz. Federico, you had a question about why only negative reviews. Do you want to come and ask that?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, good morning. Just a very quick question. So if I understood correctly, in some parts of your research, you only analyzed like negative reviews. And I was wondering why, because that might introduce some kind of, I wouldn't say bias, but at least some different ways of arguing.
Yes, in this comparison, I'd like to have the data set that fully covers some of this discipline. So I had this idea to employ only negative reviews, because here it is some kind of gatekeeping moment in which you have to decide which criteria are those most important for you, for your disciplinary. You're this gatekeeper that just try to even establish the criteria for acceptability. But in positive reviews, we can find very different, even obscure justification, that if you like some candidate, you can justify it in many different ways. And it is not so decisive. It could not be it could not only reflect the evaluative culture, but it could touch many different factors. But generally, writing negative reviews is more difficult than writing positive ones. So they are larger, they are longer. So I think that this is the most important factor and most important reason to analyze these negative reviews. And additionally, I didn't find any studies about negative reviews, so it's additional reason. I didn't hear you, David.
Sorry, I was unmuted. I was just saying, Federico, that's a great question, and very interesting that you focused on the negative and the justifications for that. So one last question from me, if that's okay, Lukasz, is if you were to try and, would it be possible for you to look at the evolution of these habilitation reviews? As in, could you go back further and trace how different disciplines are evolving their logics of judgment?
Yeah, I didn't study this longitudinally, but I think that's from other research. I know that especially in 2011, there were a new law in Polish academia that just forced and just introduced this logic of game E. So here I was wondering whether this was a context in which we can see differences between different disciplines. But I think that some factors and some results of my study was quite surprising for me, because if we consider that, for example, sociology, so this discipline that is focused more on the society, is the discipline that involves the smallest percent of reviews with logic of game S. It is quite surprising. If we Yeah, so it is. I think that true as well is here really important. I think that we need more research about the evolution, because I just captured some moment from this year's 2013 and 2019. That I think it's possible to using this framework to capture this in some evolution.
Great. I think you're right, and I think there's lots here. You've done a very good job of trying to think through the logics in a way that both is sort of inductive and also then trying to use them deductively. So Łukasz, thank you very much. You've given us lots to think about, and to think about how we review each other as workers as well, and what logics we use. I think the Polish case is fascinating. I hope we can hear more from you. Thank you all for coming, everyone. We'll put these slides, and Łukasz, you send me your slides. We'll put these slides up on our website with the recording. You can always find other presentations we've done on research evaluation cultures. We have a lot of those in our webinar series. You can always search for those. Do come back next Tuesday. We're going to switch from evaluating quality to publishing journals. We're having a discussion of German Diamond Open Access journals, which is, of course, an important step forward in research publishing and the challenges of running those journals. Other than that, Łukasz, thank you very much again for your time. Thank you all for coming, and see you again very soon.
Thank you so much for this opportunity. Thank you for your question. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Great. Thanks. Bye-bye.